From Pod617.com, the Boston Podcast Network, it's Higher Ground. Now here's your host, higher education attorney, John Graff.
Love it. Love the song. Welcome back, Aaron and Dave. It's been a while since I've seen you guys face to face. So good to see you. Hopefully we'll get back in the studio in person soon. I missed that, definitely. Welcome back.
Someday.
What's that?
Someday.
Someday it'll happen. Someday, right. You want to make a prediction on when that day is going to be?
No, I've given up on predictions. Every one of my predictions has been wrong.
Aaron?
I give up. The world makes no sense. Tom Brady's on the Buccaneers.
I would like to not talk about that, please, ever again.
Yeah, that's a sensitive subject for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, we're not going to go into that.
No. So welcome back also, everybody who's out there kind enough to tune in and listen to us for a bit today. We know your time is valuable, and that you choose to spend it with us means absolutely everything to us. Last time we talked was back on March 20, and we were talking about the coronavirus impact on higher education. And boy, have things changed in just the course of not even 30 full days at this point. You'll recall that we had my good friend and law partner Pete Moser on, who had a lot of practical advice for employers, including higher ed, on how to manage the COVID situation. I wanted to take a little bit of a break today from COVID-geddon because we're just all inundated with it at this point. Nevertheless, it's still impacting some of what we do in higher ed and how we do it. And some of that relates to Title IX. So rumor has it that the Title IX regs are imminent. As we all know, there are some radical changes. I use that term intentionally. There are some radical changes in the Title IX regs. We've been hearing that they are imminent for many, many, many months. And so are we really getting close? Thus the episode today, the new Title IX regs. Are they imminent, and what does that mean? So we're joined today by two very prominent Title IX minds and all around good people to help us figure out what's happening with these regs in higher ed in light of the pandemic. And in light of the regulatory changes. Dave, help me welcome Courtney Bullard. California. There you go. So Courtney Bullard is a lawyer and owner of Institutional Compliance Solutions with, based on the website now, over 10 years of experience representing institutions, including 8 years as a university system attorney. I've got about 8 months as a system attorney, Courtney. So
really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was in-house for a stopover. As in-house counsel, Courtney served as a trusted advisor to the chancellor, vice chancellors, athletic director of office, and that's what it says.
Just a lot of people.
And a lot of people.
A lot of higher ups.
And importantly, the Title IX coordinator. Courtney is also the host of a podcast that I like to listen to, which is the Law and Higher Ed podcast, and is a nationally recognized attorney for her contributions to news media, including the Chronicle of Higher Education. I've read your name there. Inside Higher Ed, I've read it there. Vice News on HBO, which I have not seen yet. Courtney is also the creator of Title IX University, which is an online digital platform that provides Title IX training and also has some triage expertise, remote triage expertise, which we're going to talk about later. Now, before I turn to our next guest, I just want to note something that's very unique about how Courtney and I met. Courtney, do you remember where we met?
I feel like you told me and now I don't remember. You're putting me on the spot.
If I say the name Mohegan Sun, does that ring a bell?
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
We both spoke at the summit.
At a Title IX conference that was actually held at Mohegan Sun of all places. Mm-hmm. For those of you who don't know, Mohegan Sun is what? A casino.
Literally had no idea where that was going.
Kind of an interesting place for a Title IX conference, don't you think? An environment where vice prevails. So, Dave, help me welcome Scott Schneider now. Oh, jeez. Oh, man. I saw that Saturday Night Live back when it aired. Nice. So, Scott Schneider, where does one even begin? So Scott's a partner at Hush Blackwell.
Not at the Mohegan Sun, that's for sure.
Oh, I'm sure it's more sorted than that. So Scott is, according to his website, and I agree with all of these statements, a prominent litigator and a sought-after advisor on Title IX labor and employment law issues and risk management concerns within student affairs. He is a very seasoned investigator, a very knowledgeable clery mind. So most people don't know this about Scott and me. So for years, I did the NACUA lawyers to new lawyers, new to NACUA thing. And I did their Clery intro training. And then one year, I didn't get invited back. And I was like, oh, what is this all about? And so, of course, I read that Scott Schneider has taken over for me. And I thought at the time, one of two things has happened. Either NACUA is loosening its standards or I need to up my game. Either way, I attended his session and I thought it was great.
They didn't do any background check that year, and thank goodness for that. Yeah.
They would have had you out at the beard, man.
Yeah, I think the beard was a little less unruly then.
Well, either way, we're grateful to you both for joining us. You bring a lot of wisdom to the discussion. So let me just tee it up. We've got Title IX regs that we have been promised will be published now since back in 2019. So who knows whether they're actually coming out right away. I've got some informal intel that indicates that they may be out towards the end of April, sometime in May, and that they're being held up right now because of some internal logistics issues within Department of Ed. I've also heard a rumor that the compliance deadline would be sometime towards the end of the summer. So obviously we are shut down in higher ed right now in terms of on-campus learning, right? So I imagine that the shutdown might impact how swiftly we're actually expected to comply with these things. But there's another wrinkle. I'm also hearing the word on the street that several state attorneys general are planning to file a lawsuit against the Department of Education to enjoin enforcement of the regulations. So, we've got a contingent of people who are lawyers on this call, and then some on this conference, and then some non-lawyers. Scott, as a quote prominent litigator, help us understand. Help us understand what is an injunction. What does that mean when I tell the world that, hey, somebody's going to file an injunction motion against the Department of Ed?
Yeah, I mean, in this context, I think the most basic way to explain it is to say, court, we want you to step in here and say, you don't have to comply with these regs at this point. I mean, that's I think the best, easiest way to explain it. And I was thinking about, we were talking about this earlier. I mean, sort of the last time that I remember sort of a high profile reg, state attorney generals deciding to fight it was the FLSA changes back at the end of the Obama administration. They were going to change, I think, the overtime rules to basically make it more difficult for employers to claim exemptions and for more employees to be covered by the overtime rules. And there was, I think, about 20, 25 state attorney generals who got together and filed the lawsuit. And it was here, I'm in Austin. It was here in the Eastern District of Texas, where a court basically came back and said, no, we're enjoining enforcement of these new regs or this new rule. And again, the net impact of that was, it was as if the rules were published and nobody had to follow them. So that's, if we go down that route, I mean, that's what I would expect to see here. I don't know which state, I can't imagine, for instance, on this one, like Texas would be involved in that. So it'd be interesting to see which states get together. I think, Cuomo has been pretty outspoken on this, but it would basically be a collection of states getting together, going to a court and saying, block enforcement of these regulations.
And so, Courtney, your sense as to whether higher ed, just generally, would like to see these regulations in their current form blocked?
I think in general, yes, especially with everything that's going on with COVID, they've got enough on their plates. So I think the general consensus, at least for my clients, would be not to have to add something else. On the flip side, I also think there's a lot of folks, especially like myself, that's like, let's just get on with it. if we're going to have to comply and this is going to happen, then let's just do it so that we can move on with our lives instead of all these conspiracy theories every other week on when they're going to drop and if they're going to drop and whether they're going to drop in the same form and how much money is it going to cost to come into compliance and all the other things that are going to happen. So I think that, as we've already talked about, higher ed has a lot on its plate to some degree, and I know we'll get into this in a minute, but some Title IX offices are winding down. You know, they don't have as many reports coming in. So yeah, I mean, the summer could be a time to get into compliance if these regs are going to come. But by the same token, personally, people are dealing with a lot as well. It's not all about their jobs when they're trying to work from home. So I don't know. My feeling is like, let's just get on with it. Let's just do this.
Yeah, that's where I am too. I mean, I feel like we've been talking about this and for how long, John? It's like 2 years now?
Yeah, 2 years. It's like beating a dead horse.
Yeah, I think it's 2 years. And I think, you know, if my memory serves me, last summer, Scott, we did a pod episode where we talking about, you know, the new regs and what was going to happen, you know, so.
Yeah.
And so much in the new regs, at least in the jurisdiction I'm in, I mean, the circuit I'm in is the Sixth Circuit. So a lot of my clients are Sixth Circuit clients. A lot of what's in the regs, not all of it, but some things are certainly consistent with why we're seeing litigation trends anyways. So people in California, people in Sixth Circuit, they're already having to make some of those changes, or at least we're advising them to make some of those changes.
And is that because of the Baum decision?
Yep, Baum, and I mean, pretty much that was the catalyst, I would say. I can't think off the top of my head the one in California right now, but yeah, the Baum, we're already having Baum hearings and things like that at most of the state schools, which are very similar to what OCR is going to require in the new regs.
And help me understand, Courtney, how when you say we're already having Baum hearings, what does that mean?
So moving to, a lot of the institutions already have live hearings, but moving to live hearings where you allow cross-examination by an advisor in some way, shape, or form. So either submitting questions that the chair is able to ask on behalf of a party, that's what you mostly see, and then the chair is in the position of having to decide what's relevant and what's not and all those great things. But kind of following that same framework, you had some institutions that were state institutions that were single investigator and have moved away from that into a hearing model. At the very least, it's kind of on the Baum, when you talk about a Baum hearing, at the very least going from losing the single investigator model, going to a hearing. But then you have many who've also moved into ensuring everybody has an advisor and then the ability to submit questions to a chair and ask questions of each other. I haven't seen any where they're, well, that's not true. Never mind. I take that back.
Yeah, so I'll ask this question of either one of you. Have you had an opportunity to actually sit in on one of these hearings?
Yes.
Thoughts? How'd it go?
I won't name the school, but it was less than ideal. It's just, you know, it's to ramp up. I mean, look, courts have been doing live hearings for hundreds of years, and there's a lot of institutional knowledge and expertise, and we know how to do it. For especially privates, where there's really no, you know, outside of California, I mean, I don't know of a private institution that has had, quote, full-blown due process hearings for much of anything outside of tenure revocation. This is very new, and when people try new things that end up being a little complicated, what you're going to find there's going to be a whole host of mistakes that you make early on. It's just like anything else that you do in life, riding a bike, you know, making a steak, whatever. I mean, it's there are going to be some errors in ramping it up, and some of that we can train around and train people up. I'm not one of these people who thinks this has to be an absolute disaster. We can train people up. We can put the right people in these positions. But these are hard to do these things well. It's very, very difficult. And by the way, we're doing them in a setting that's probably as difficult emotionally as any setting humanly imaginable. I mean, even if I've tried cases, civil cases, you know, discrimination cases, what have you, those are hard enough. Trying cases where the issue is whether or not someone was sexually assaulted is just rife with all sorts of emotional energy that, just makes it piles on to what is already a very difficult process.
It's very
Okay.
messy. It's messy for institutions that
Yeah.
aren't familiar with live hearings to move into. And for some of the smaller schools, they don't have a ton of hearings. They may have one a year. So you're having to kind of relearn every time, even when you train the people up. Whereas some of the other schools, especially the publics, are used to a hearing process and they're just kind of tweaking.
Yeah,
And
and we
it's-
always say, like, when you try something new, you learn from your mistakes. And it's just, given the stakes for both students here, man, it's just hard to acknowledge that we're going to go from one sort of way of doing things to a radically different way of doing things. And by doing that, we have to acknowledge that probably a whole host of mistakes are going to be made in that transition. And that's just kind of painful. That's been my biggest gripe with all of this is it took us a while to finally start doing this work really well after the 2011 Dear Colleague letter. And of course, I think mistakes were made at the front end, which a lot of people seize on now. And now what we're going to do is radically change the way we do these things for a number of different schools. And then, we'll probably at some point become proficient at that. And then another administration presumably will come in. I don't think Donald Trump's going to serve forever. Is that a possibility?
Armageddon? I don't know.
but at some point we'll have another administration and the pendulum will swing, and
Yes.
it's just
It's exhausting.
every time you make a change like that, you don't ramp up, you don't start at perfect, or you don't start at mistake free. You're going to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. I just don't think these radical changes serve students well.
Agreed.
Yeah, it was tough, right? It was tough back in 2011 to get your head wrapped around the guidance. And so what we saw in my firm were two things. At the time, we were doing the investigations ourselves, and those would usually be like a high profile investigation. You have some senior executive or board member, somebody who was under investigation. I guess when it comes to sexual harassment, a little bit more hands-on we were when it came to domestic violence. That seemed to be a harder one for institutions to investigate back then. And then we started doing the co-investigator models, where it's not just us necessarily. We would be with an administrative person, like a Title IX coordinator or something. They would ride shotgun, and those, they serve to add an element of, I guess, enhanced fairness to the process, but also as a live training for the in-house person. And, to Scott's point, you could see the level of sophistication in the in-house investigators just going up and up and up and up.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say you saw a lot better of an outcome for a lot of people. Hold on, my video's wonky. And so I'm back, yeah. And so now, to your point, Scott, that's something I've got some concern about too, is just, do we spend another 4 years as, training higher ed to handle this? Probably having them spend a lot of money on outsourcing to, hearing officers and people who can actually steer the relevance discussion, balance the equities in the room, only to have another sea change later. And then what does that do to the actual parties to these cases? In 5 years, if the regs drop, say regs drop now, 5 years from now, there's a new administration. And now, am I on one side of that V just claiming that whatever happened to me in my process 3 years ago or 4 years ago was just not fair? And I don't know how you restore the fairness feel.
I think maybe, and I've said this publicly, I think part of what is, if we're being honest, part of what's, and I haven't seen what the final regs, I've only seen the proposed regs. I don't know what's going to be in the final, but I think if we're being honest, what part of the policy aim here is to make it as difficult as possible for someone to want to participate in this process. And so what I think part of the policy aim is to say, we don't like this process all that much. We don't think schools should be in this business of adjudicating these sorts of claims. If they are, we're going to make it as cumbersome and difficult as possible. And there are two things that can happen if I'm right about that in an environment like that. The first thing is that basically people who are victims of sex misconduct say, I'm not even going to report any of this. The reports go, back to where they have been historically, which is people don't come forward because they don't want to go through a process that looks more and more like a gauntlet. I mean, the idea of direct cross-examination in a school by a lawyer it's sort of mind-boggling when you think about the history of higher ed. The other, and I'm more optimistic about this, the other possibility here is we start looking for non-adjudicatory ways to resolve some of these complaints. And in particular, with vehicles like restorative justice or some rigorous informal ways that, don't put people and our students through what looks like, basically a civil hearing, a criminal hearing, or whatever. I'm a little more optimistic about that and the possibilities there. But I think that will be the net impact, assuming that the final regs are what we suspect the final regs would be. I would think the net impact of that is going to be students no longer wanting to come forward and participating in the process, and maybe not even coming forward at all, which would be a tragedy, or students looking and clamoring when appropriate for some sort of alternative way to resolve what is a terribly difficult problem.
Yeah, I agree with Scott. I think we're going to see a huge upsurge in informal resolution type processes, with the caveat that can also be dangerous in some respects, because this whole restorative justice term is being thrown around. And even in my own conference with our keynote speaker, her definition of restorative justice was not what my understanding was. And a lot of outfits out there now doing quote unquote restorative justice training. And that can be dangerous in its own way. And so my big soapbox these days is, I love the idea of informal resolutions. I think it can work really, really well, whatever that's going to, or alternative resolutions, but getting really clear on what that means. Like mediation means something totally different to a lawyer than what they're using it. You just hear all these terms being thrown around, and making sure schools are intentional with whatever it is that they decide to do, and not trying to go become school, licensed therapists with an honorary degree to try to move these through the process, if that makes sense. So I agree I think it could be great actually, but there's going to be some errors there too as well. And I don't know what those errors are going to look like for the parties sometimes. That could also be dangerous.
I think it's tricky. It's sort of like, to analogize it to something I'm seeing happen right now is, the world has gone to online learning, right? And it's really impacting students. I've got school age kids. I know you do, Courtney, as well. Scott, I think you do as well, right? It's impacting their day-to-day existence in a big way. And one thing I'm seeing sometimes is sort of some unrealistic expectations of parents as to what the teachers can reasonably accomplish, during those sessions, right? It's not a matter of excellence at this point, it's a matter of survival. And so, but when you're not deeply in the know, you don't really have a way sometimes to discern, what's a great experience versus a not great experience. And I would think that applies to people going through the Title IX process at any school, especially if there's a hearing model in place. You're not going to know whether you could have had a better outcome with a different hearing officer, or, you're not even going to know what the training looked like behind the scenes. And I think, having worked as a sexual assault investigator, as a police officer for a while, parties need to know, whether they are on the respondent side or the complainant side, exactly what the process is all about. And they need to have some faith in the qualifications of the people who do that job. So,
Amen. Speaking of just, I'm going to totally switch gears on you. I heard Dave earlier talking about qualifications, talk about Tom Brady.
Here we go.
And I do feel sad for the people of Boston. It must be really difficult to have lost the second best quarterback of all time to the Tampa Bay.
Here we go.
And
Okay.
I just want you to know I have a lot of empathy, Dave, for you and John and Aaron. I don't know what your affiliation is with the professional football team. For instance, my team, the New Orleans Saints, if we had lost the greatest quarterback of all time to an inferior team in the league, I would be devastated. So I just want you to know.
Can you shut his mic? Can you just shut him down?
I can. I'm thinking about it.
Nah, man. I mean, if we're going to talk about, quarterback qualities, at least comparing Tom Brady to Drew Brees, thank you. I think that's fair-ish.
Yeah. Well, Drew Brees is the best quarterback of all time. Thank you.
All right. So Scott's a guest, and we treat our guests fairly, so you can have the last word on that.
Their scandal was more deplorable than our scandal. At least we didn't pay people to knock people's heads off. Touche.
But technically, Drew was not embroiled in that scandal, unlike cheater Tom Brady, who was.
Okay. All right. Aaron, can you cross him off the guest list from now on, please?
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for joining.
In all seriousness, Scott's a good friend, and this is how we do all the time. It is a constant ritual of trading barbs and shots, etc. So, Courtney.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about triaging of Title IX cases in the current remote pandemic model.
Well, there's a lot at play at the moment. I think folks are, as I already mentioned, dealing with both professional and personal issues as they transition to working at home. I work from home and have for years, but I have 4 children who are now also working from home. So that proves to be interesting as they run across at all every time I'm on a call or in a Zoom. Luckily, they're behaving right now. But so a lot of these Title IX professionals are at home. They also have kids at home or family members are taken care of. I think from a triage perspective, that's the first and foremost thing they've got to worry about is personally taking care of themselves and figuring out what's going on in certain states. People are falling ill and all those good things. And then professionally, a lot of folks are in the middle of doing investigations and moving from in-person investigations to virtual investigations. I think at this point, we're a month in or something. I'm sure your clients are kind of figuring that out and things are going okay. There's been challenges to that by attorneys, of course. But for the most part, that transition is happening okay. Then there's the, will they still be getting new complaints and what that's going to look like going forward, whether there's any policy changes that need to be made in order to address this new virtual world or not. And I think that, when we've surveyed some folks in some of our webinars, we've had like hundreds of people in there and we'll do these polls asking how everybody's doing. And pretty much on average, everyone's responds fair. Some people are doing well. Some people are really struggling. But most folks, I think, are figuring out a new rhythm. Overall, I think complaints are obviously going to go down as students aren't having that interaction. I do have my own predictions for when and if campuses open back up for those students that can return. I think there's going to be like mega COVID parties at the fraternities and a huge, explosion of things at some point. It might be a year from now, but at some point I think that's going to happen. But and then thinking about new behaviors that might be alleged as a result of this new environment. So
like what?
Well, I've had cases of folks who are HIV positive who then go have sexual relationships with people and then don't tell them. I could see that happening. And then more importantly, I think what we'll see more of is just in the online context, harassment and stalking maybe coming out more, in the online context going forward. I don't know what these new behaviors are going to be. And but that's something I think we all have to be thinking about and that Title IX coordinators are having to think about. And then one thing we've talked to them a lot about is sustainability planning and, having backups for your backups. I mean, we've done it as a team here. If I get sick, where does that case go? Managing expectations, staying engaged, and ensuring that, there are a lot of schools that have very large Title IX offices and coming up with those plans are not so difficult, but then there are plenty of schools where it's 1 or 2 people. And so what if your Title IX coordinator falls ill and has a leave of absence for a period of time? Something that probably should have been thought about before, but obviously is way more imminent now with the COVID-19 situation. And if you're in the middle of an investigation and you fall ill, you don't want those parties to hear crickets on the other end. They've got to start setting up at the beginning to manage those expectations and kind of overly communicating and just thinking through those hard things.
Is that something your company, Institutional Compliance Solutions, is that something that you guys are doing now? Are you providing that redundancy?
Yeah, I mean, we're mostly at this point working with our clients where we serve as legal counsel to help them in that transition. But then we've had some institutions where we've come in, looked at their open cases. That's our triage service. We take their open cases, we help them figure out how to transition. The thing that might be getting a little lost in the shuffle is support measures, and just helping them not just look at open cases, but look at past cases where support measures are in place, and reaching out to those students to figure out, are these support measures ongoing? Are they no contact directives that apply even when you're not on campus? Some schools they do, some schools they don't. So really evaluating and making sure that there's that continuity and that support is still being offered if needed. So from a triage perspective, it's threefold, really, looking at their policies, getting them moved over to the virtual with their active cases, and then also looking at their entire case log and past cases and what support measures are still ongoing.
So right, we have to talk later because we do have some work I think we need to do on that front together. Scott, let me flip this to the Clery features of some of this compliance for a second. And I didn't mean to cut you off. I see what you were about to say something, but in terms of, Courtney's talking about offering support measures. We've got to disclose that we can offer those support measures in our Clery compliance documents, our annual security report, et cetera. What does this mean for those disclosures at this point? Can we actually meet the promises in the current era that we're making in our annual security report just last year?
I think it depends on what we put in our annual security report, yes, and what promises we've made, and if we need to make adjustments. I don't think anybody anticipated anything like this happening. If we need to make adjustments, make the adjustments. I was more interested, I'll be honest with you, John, less interested in Clery. I was intrigued by something Courtney said, which was mega COVID parties. And I immediately thought, John, we should start a band. We should start a band.
I'm in.
It's called Mega COVID.
You're welcome. You're welcome, guys. I'll expect royalties on the name.
We will go.
Oh,
we
no.
will go to campuses throughout America, and we will rage, John.
You'll generate business for me while y'all are out there raging. Unfortunately.
My question is another little Megadeth clip there. I'm more of a Kingmaker guy myself, but
I will say this one, a couple of really, so I'm going to piggyback off of what Courtney was saying. I mean, the good news is, at least in my experience, we're getting some interesting new cases. I've seen a lot more cyber stalking type things now than we did before, but caseload is coming down. And the guidance I'm trying to give clients is, take the time, first off, do your investigations, make sure they're really, really good. One of the interesting things is it's been easier to schedule interviews now because people are home, they're not bouncing around to classes and parties and extracurriculars. We can get, them. And so let's do what we can to quickly and with a high degree of quality process our investigations, but use this time. That's why I'm almost hoping the regs drop sooner rather than later. Give people as much time as humanly possible to start transitioning to whatever the final regs are going to say. And we have some time, to focus on what does good policy look like in this space? What does a top-notch training program look like in this space? The sort of things that you typically don't have time to do because you're just so overwhelmed with the caseloads that you're facing. Use this time productively.
Yeah, that's a lot of things. We've taken with our clients is sat down with their teams that aren't having active cases right now to say, how can you be proactive going forward? I mean, this is unprecedented time for them, where we're always, I'm sure all of us are doing webinars or trainings and telling them all the things they need to be doing to be proactive and to have robust policies and procedures, but there's not the time to do it because all the Title IX coordinators are drinking from a fire hose on a daily basis, just trying to get through the day. Now there's that opportunity that they haven't had before to kind of get some training if they've got the funding, but also to sit down as a team and work together on future stuff. So even without the NPRM, it's a great time for that. But if the NPRM is going to come out, then now would be helpful. At least they've got the time to do it.
And I know outside, I mean, I know we're talking a lot about Title IX and Clery, but outside of that, the conversation I've been having this week more than any other conversation is schools saying we need to figure out a way to be open in the fall, and what does that look like, and how do we manage risk? And I find it to be the most fascinating, complicated question that schools are wrestling with. And we're also working, I keep hearing this word fluid. I'm so sick of it. There needs to be a new one. But yeah, we're in an environment where the facts are changing on a daily basis. If tomorrow, and I saw something on Twitter yesterday about, wow, we're making developments in terms of an antiviral response to this virus, that you get it if you're symptomatic. You can take this medicine that's from some company, I don't even remember the name, and the chances of you dying go down considerably. I mean, if we're making progress in that regard, well, the risk management calculations become super, super different in terms of bringing students back in the fall semester. I have a daughter, she goes to LSU. By the way, go Tigers, greatest college football team of all time. I think even Dave Yaz would agree.
Do you see this, Scott? This would be Alabama.
Yeah, Roll Tide.
That's our house. That's our house. Oh, we got Auburn.
We did beat Alabama and Auburn last year.
No, I know.
But God bless her. She's a junior in college. She wants to go back next fall. And part of that is the alternative is staying here with me. And I could understand why someone would want to exit that situation as promptly as possible. But she wants to get on with some sense of, normalcy with her life and all that, so long as it's safe. That was brutal, Dave Yaz. I was at that game and needed a therapist immediately after that.
I thought it was a pretty good non-call.
So for those of you who are watching us on our YouTube channel, you can see that Dave Yaz is taunting Scott Schneider. If you're just listening, then you're missing the fun.
It's the Saints heartbreak moment.
Yeah, it's there's been a lot of those, but so what does and talk about Clery, I mean, what does that look like from a safety perspective?
And my clients feel very bipolar. They're like, we're preparing to not go back and we're preparing to go back. We're preparing for furloughs and not going back, and we're preparing to go back, and what safety measures have to be put in place. Like, nobody knows. It's crazy. But yeah, from a safety perspective in Clery, it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, so it's funny. Joe Storch and I did a NACUA web briefing last Tuesday.
I listened. It was very good.
Oh, thank you. The turnout was great. There were like 640 people on there. Because I think people are interested. They wanted to know two things, really. One, what was what do we do about emergency notifications in light of the corona pandemic, right? And specifically, I think the question was, across the industry, what happens when we get a positive case? Do we have to send out an emergency notification? And my thought on that was always, like, it's sort of like diving into a shallow swimming pool at this point. Going outside of your house is an open and obvious risk. And by the time the Department of Ed actually decided to issue its guidance on when, anybody? April 3, after all of higher ed had been shut down for like 2.5 or 3 weeks, it starts to water down the importance of sending out some kind of emergency notice. The other issue is, what does that mean for your crime on campus? You're not going to have any crime on campus. Your statistics are going to go way down. To your point, Courtney, your online harassment type statistics, the information is there. The incidents may increase, but it doesn't necessarily translate to Clery because most people can't be on campus anyway.
Right.
What we're starting to see in our practice is a lot of thinking about emergency management planning around the return, as Scott was saying, to campus. What do we do if we bring everybody back and there's a second wave and we've got to now shut down again after 30 days or 15 days, or when the semester's in full swing right before finals, and that just brings a host of risk mitigation concerns to bear, safety considerations, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm hearing is that there'll be a sort of a phased in return. We'll let either certain years or certain programs come back. And I think to the point that Courtney was making earlier, that lull of that period of time where we can actually get our affairs in order, that window will shrink as more and more people are on campus, and then there's more and more in-person contact, et cetera. So use the time wisely, right?
Yeah, I wanted to point out that NACUA only asked you to do that because I refused.
Yeah, good. There are A-list celebrities who have made fortunes because they were the second person in. So thank
Hilarious.
you. Thank you for being too high on the horse there, buddy. So the cringe laugh. In terms of, besides just the hearing, I love the shade, Scott. Besides the hearing dynamics, the in-person cross-exam, the cross-exam by a lawyer, what are a couple of other concerns we're hearing from our clients about the impact of these new regs?
Just, I mean, that it's clearly going to increase cost, because you're literally putting someone who may be a student affairs professional in the position of having to make evidentiary decisions that even for seasoned judges are exceptionally complicated. And so I think most schools are realizing we're probably going to have to outsource this. And I think that was bad enough prior to Corona, but the hit on institutional budgets associated with this, and no one comes out of this, by the way, unscathed. There's not a college or university in the country that is not going to take a significant hit. This is an unfunded mandate in a time where we have serious concerns about our operational budget. So that's the biggest one, is how in the heck are we going to put someone in that position? How are we going to pay for that, especially given sort of the challenges, not sort of the challenges, the incredible challenges that we will be facing because of this unprecedented disaster.
Right, people are losing their jobs. They're being furloughed, they're being laid off or terminated, et cetera. And now the government's coming in and saying, hey, you're gonna have to hire up this resource.
Yeah, we're going to give, especially for private schools, we're going to give you, under the guise of a civil rights statute, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, we're going to force you in your student conduct department to, in essence, enact the most rigorous form of due process imaginable in a time. And so it's like, well, all right, how do we staff that? And
there's
I don't know.
Well, and the thing is, what actually falls under the definition of sexual harassment under the new regs is going to be not as much conduct is going to fall under that will require the rigorous process. But regardless, if things come out the way that they were proposed, which we don't know, but regardless, there's things like that schools have to give each party an advisor that aligns with their own interest. I mean, that's not something right now that's required of schools. I mean, there's all this depth you're going to need and folks you're going to need to volunteer, maybe because you can't pay them to do things that I don't know who's going to want to be put in that position to start with. There's also some record keeping as far as being able to share evidence during the hearings. That has to be kept online. Well, before COVID, that seemed really daunting. Now, after COVID, post-COVID, schools are having to do it anyways that already run a hearing process, have a way to share information in a secure manner, those kinds of things. So to some degree that will help prepare for that. But there's just going to, like Scott said, I mean, there's going to be money that needs to be spent, in my opinion, on changing policies and procedures and processes, like going and copying and pasting or taking a boxed policy isn't going to work, in my opinion. You've really got to think about how it impacts your campus and what works best for your campus, and then have people help you with implementation of the policy and actual training to do all the things that are going to be required. All that costs money. Trying to do it without spending the money is just going to land schools where they've been, which is in litigation. So Money. That's it.
Well,
Costs money.
those schools are certainly well served if they align with Courtney Bullard at Institutional Compliance Solutions, Scott Schneider at Law Dude, self-proclaimed Dave Grohl of Higher Ed at Hush Blackwell, Austin office. The location doesn't matter for any of us anymore, right? Because we work remotely. We're certainly here to help at Hirsch Roberts Weinstein. We got a little bit of experience in this neck of the woods. I love that picture. Before we wrap, closing thoughts, Scott.
Are we going to wrap with an R?
Actually, Courtney's going to wrap.
No, I'm not going to wrap.
She's the rap person.
I was not the rapper.
Even Larson's involved. Yeah.
I said this to you earlier. I mean, it's the setting aside Title IX and Clery. I mean, this, what a remarkable position we find higher ed in at this point. And, I think, so I was in-house at Tulane, and we were blessed. We had Katrina, which was, basically impacted the entire campus. And we were blessed to have a president and Scott Cowan, who was just this amazing leader. And basically one thing he said was, we're reopening in January. And everybody thought he was crazy for saying that. But he also took the opportunity to basically make a lot of the hard changes that the university knew it needed to make for a long, long time. And finally, sort of a crisis allowed it the opportunity to make those hard changes and frankly put it on a trajectory for the next decade to 15 years where, it's a lot healthier place. And so I think, again, setting aside 9 and Clery and all that sort of stuff, that's where we are. I mean, we have a moment right now in this time of crisis to do really good, deep thinking about where do we want to be in a decade from now, and then making hopefully the courageous decisions to get to that place.
Excellent. Guys, I can't thank you enough for joining us. I could listen to you guys all day. I have the utmost respect for you. One of the things I love about this circle of Title IX lawyers, and there are others out there too, is that, we come together to share and internally and then externally information. I love that, we're all at different organizations. We all want to promote our businesses and whatnot, but we do it together. And, we're able to benefit from each other's guidance and knowledge. So thank you very much. Scott, if people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that? Besides just blasting on an electric guitar out the window.
I'm going to do something weird. Hey, why don't y'all text me? You want to do that?
Right on.
That? I'm going to give you this number. You ready for this? Just text me. I'm going to get random texts. I didn't plan for this. It's 504-214-4962. Text
Aaron,
me.
could you please promote that everywhere all over the planet?
Is a face tattoo okay too?
Yeah, I'm totally fine. Yeah, if you put the face tattoo just on this cheek right here, 504-214-4962. Please text me.
All right, and then we'll get the Scott Schneider help for you. Courtney, how do people get a hold of you?
You're welcome to text me as well. Maybe we should have a texting war, but I know Scott would win because of the beard and his overall coolness. So I'm afraid to even enter into that competition. But I will say doing this has been really fun, and it's always a fun distraction. And to have it on live like this, Scott is definitely, it's like every time I turn around, he has a different background. It's cracking me up. Anyways, to find me, really, my website, www.icslawyer.com. You can email me, chb@icslawyer.com. You can call me, 423-710-4027. You can text me there if you want to. So we're here, and just to dovetail on what you said, John, I really love the colleagues that I've made in this area across the country that I respect and I know do really great work. It's really fun to collaborate, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we appreciate you guys. Can't thank you enough for sharing your time and your insight with us today. respect both of you, and I know no matter who gets a call from a client, they're in good hands with either one of you guys. If you like what you heard today, please share us with your friends, colleagues, family. Get the word out, because our goal here is to offer some practical takeaways to the industry, and I think we've done that today. We would very much appreciate it if you'd subscribe to us on what, Erin?
Spotify or Apple Podcasts, right, Dave?
That's
It used to be iTunes, wasn't it? Right.
It used to be
Yeah, it
iTunes,
used to be
Apple
iTunes.
Podcasts.
Yeah, and if you want to get a hold of me, hit me at JTGraff. It's at JTGraff on Twitter. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Courtney. All right, that's a wrap.
Thanks, guys. Stay safe, stay well.
Guys.
All right.
Soldiers.